Go out among men, and find the ways thereof, that he in the gulf may know. To Nyarlathotep, mighty messenger, must all things be told, and he shall put on the semblance of man, the waxen mask and the robe that hides, and come down from the world of seven suns to mock. That was a quote from The Whisperer in Darkness, a novella by Howard Phillips Lovecraft. Now, you may be wondering, how does that story in particular relate in any way to the video game No, I'm Not a Human? Surprisingly, it does, in more ways than one. But before we get into that, I should provide some context first. If you're watching this video, I'm going to assume that you are at least somewhat familiar with the general setting and story of No, I'm Not a Human. If that isn't the case, then I will recommend for you to first play the game yourself, as it's an incredibly good visual novel, and everything in the game, starting from the setting to the artwork and the soundtrack, is pretty much its own vibe. So, as a short disclaimer, this video will obviously contain spoilers. If you haven't experienced the game first, proceed at your own risk. We begin the game in our own house, as our neighbor visits us at night and informs us that apparently strange things are happening. We are told that the sun is increasing in its activity and that going out during the day is going to be dangerous due to the temperatures rising to unbearable levels, to the point of even possibly burning us alive if we are caught outside. We are also informed that mysterious creatures that resemble humans have been sighted wandering around, making use of their disguise to infiltrate other people's homes, only to kill them afterwards. These creatures are called visitors, although the exact reason as to this nickname is unknown. Is it because they come from another planet? Or is it because they quite literally attempt to visit other people's homes in search of new victims? Who knows? And that's the mantra that this setting appears to gravitate around. Two simple words: who knows? The theme of the game revolves a lot around the idea of information being extremely scarce, with reliable knowledge being completely non-existent. There is a lot in terms of questions and uncertitude, and even more in terms of what appears to be rumors and speculation, but little, if anything, in terms of definitive answers. We know the sun is causing the earth to scorch and burn during the day, but we don't know why that happened seemingly out of nowhere. We know that creatures pretending to be humans are wandering around and killing other people, but we don't know where they came from, what are they exactly, or what is their end goal. We don't even know why we call them visitors to begin with. But there is one thing that we know, and that is not all visitors are similar to each other. While visitors generally tend to stick to the idea of being creatures that attempt to pass as humans only to infiltrate the dwellings of other humans and overcome them through numbers or subterfuge, there are others that don't particularly abide to this. Some appear to be unaware of the fact that they are visitors, while others appear to be not just aware, but proud of it, barely even attempting to hide that fact. And others go beyond that, with the Pale Man, for example. Clearly a visitor, and yet clearly different from the rest, far more self-aware, bigger, stronger, faster, and guided by rules or principles that other visitors do not seem to abide to. But the Pale Man isn't the only uniquely distinct visitor. No, there are others, but one of them is more interesting than the rest. As I said earlier, information in this game is scarce, and while the television, the radio, and the stories of others are our main way to gather information, nothing can be trusted more than our own two eyes. But given that we don't get to leave our home, what we can see is limited by what goes on inside our home, which is generally nothing, and what goes on outside our home and is visible through our windows. Over the garden wall is an achievement that we receive for witnessing every window scene, and receiving this achievement also means you're going to receive the achievement "What the hell was that?" An achievement for witnessing horrors beyond your comprehension, just outside your window. Something that happens particularly on the 12th night of the month, if we just so happen to look outside the middle window. So, in the words of the achievement's namesake, what the hell was that? A black creature, vaguely humanoid, crawling along the ground just out of sight of the two FEMA officers, makes its appearance for a few seconds, disappearing in the thick foliage in the background. That's it. And yes, that's what the game refers to that as. It. It is perhaps an entity far more mysterious than the Pale Man, or anything else that we encounter in the game. What we know of this entity is that it's a mysterious creature of remarkable strength that feasts on burned human bodies and that FEMA has failed to contain. On the 11th day, the creature is first referenced through a radio transmission. They shouldn't have burned the bodies. It draws it. If they'd let the remains, it wouldn't have come. The burned bodies are in reference to the events of the 10th day, where FEMA, in an attempt to cover up something, began going on a rampage in the city and burning down everything. The 12th day arrives with a new radio transmission, this time by FEMA itself. Dispatch to all FEMA units. New directive. Code 451 is replaced with Code 955. Do not burn bodies. Apply lime instead. Repeat. Code 451 is cancelled. Burning remains has failed to contain the threat posed by the subject. Then, the 13th day, along with the final radio transmission. This is 18-8. We couldn't contain it. The subject has left the city perimeter. Immediate backup required. We need backup now. We couldn't contain the subject alone. Silence. It appears that whatever the entity outside of our home was, FEMA is aware of it, has attempted to contain it, and has failed to do so. Did FEMA attempt to contain the entity because they wanted it alive, or because they were unable to kill it? Both possibilities have terrifying implications. But what if I told you that it is possible for us to not only encounter it again, but also to play as it? No, I'm Not a Human revolves mainly around having various scripted events set to happen on certain nights or days, but there is a particularly odd one that is triggered upon hosting a little too many visitors inside our home for longer than we should. While the community refers to this as the dream sequence, I have the feeling there is far more going on here than it meets the eye. During this special event, I believe we take brief control of the monster It as it ravages through our home, killing every single guest, visitor or not, besides ourselves. The fact that this is It is hinted at by the sounds that we hear during the sequence. And the height at which we find ourselves while moving, almost as if crawling along the ground. Some people tend to believe for this to be our character becoming a visitor and killing everyone inside the house. Something pointed out at the fact that the achievement related to this sequence is called Walk a Mile in Their Shoes. But I personally believe for this to be wrong. While it is theorized that being a visitor might be a result of a viral infection, I don't think it's possible for someone to simply become a visitor like that. After all, no matter how many visitors we allow into our home and interact with, all the surviving human guests will never become visitors themselves, despite spending time in the same room with other visitors, something also pointed out by the surgeon, as he claims that there have been no reports of anyone human turning suddenly into a visitor, something that should have happened by now if visitors were indeed the results of a virus infection. It is also important to note that visitors inside our house will never kill other visitors, so why would we, as we turn into a visitor, proceed to do that? It just doesn't make any sense. I think that the sequence in question just puts us in the shoes of another character, It, the Body Eater, as it rampages through our home, slaughtering humans and visitors alike, but letting us live for some reason. This is going to be another one of those little questions that the game loves to ask but to leave unanswered. But perhaps there is a way to get a few answers. It's all about asking them to the right people. Finally, some kind of shelter. What happened to your eyes? I saw something unspeakable. I won't dare describe it, for who dwells on what the mind birds when it breaks? It's always just in front of me, burned into the darkness. There are no words for the ancient dread that tore through my soul. Trust me, if you'd seen it, you'd have done the same. You mean the pale man? You really think a pale man is all it will take for me to rip my eyes from their sockets? No. Oh no. There is something far worse out here. Bigger. Stronger. It can't be named. It follows the scent of burning flesh and reaps what we've sown. That thing was never meant to exist. It shouldn't exist. Come in. Thank you. Maybe now I can finally get some rest. This is the Blinded Man, one of the most unique possible guests that we can find on our doorstep through the game, and also the reason behind this video, or at least half of it. The Blinded Man is a guaranteed human guest and arrives at our doorstep in a state of distress, revealing that he tore off his own eyes after witnessing an unspeakable horror. And you guessed it, the horror in question was it, the creature we saw skulking around our window. The Blinded Man can only arise starting from night 7, and he has a very unique story and dialogue that we can go through each day. So dark. So tell me, what did you see? You don't want to know. Trust me, it's a mercy not to. I thought if I could stop seeing, I'd be free of that thing. But it's carved into me now. I still dream. It's always there. It visits often. So, is it better not having eyes? Hard to say. I know I'll never see that thing again. Even if something heals me, I won't know what it was. It's strange. I don't know what your home looks like. It's hard to navigate, and my sockets will ache if not for the meds. But at least I won't have to see that horror ever again. I will adjust. Yet knowing what I saw, it's etched into my very being. I will carry it until the end of time. You're looking rough. Perhaps I need to comb my hair? I had a dream last night. I was walking along the tram tracks, heading home. Houses, trees. I heard the trolley coming and stepped to the side. I turned around and saw something snatch a man in the street. It moved so fast I could barely see it, but I knew what it was. I ran after the trolley, but I never got close. I'll never reach it, never reach the truth that hides at the end of the line. Then I woke up. Are you okay? Another dream. It came again. I was walking down the road. Night street lights flickered. Then I turned and saw it coming toward me. Slowly. This time, I could clearly see how it moved. I tried to run, but it was gaining. I reached my house, but I couldn't unlock the front gate. Climbed the fence. Fumbled in my pocket. Keys slipping between my fingers. So I ran around the house. Another fence. Climbed it. Then I stopped. Silence. I looked up, and there it was, reaching for me over the fence. Do you think it's the painkillers? Any dreams last night? Yes, but I don't want to talk about it. I understand now. We're all going to die. It will tear us apart, awake or asleep. We will all burn. Nothing matters anymore. It's over. Leave me, please. This is the final conversation that we can have with the Blinded Man, and other than testing him for the various signs of being a visitor, we won't be able to talk to him further about the horrors he has witnessed. We leave the kitchen, continue our day, and go to sleep, but upon returning in the kitchen the next day, we will be met by this. It appears that the horrors were too much to take for this man. as this storyline ends, we are rewarded with an achievement: The Whisper in Darkness. The Whisper in Darkness is not just the title of this achievement, but also a novella by H.P. Lovecraft, a mix of science fiction and Lovecraft's signature cosmic horror that delves into ideas and themes that are strangely familiar with those of No, I'm Not Human. So, you know what I'm doing? I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to attempt to talk about just what those similarities are and how does The Whisper in Darkness relate to the story of No, I'm Not Human, or, well, how No, I'm Not Human relates to The Whisper in Darkness, if I am to be more precise. Now, if you were expecting this entire video to be solely about the game No, I'm Not Human, I'm afraid that it won't be the case, as a good portion of this video will be dedicated to The Whisper in Darkness, as I believe that talking about this story and analyzing it is important in order to place into the context of the game that references it. For that purpose, this next part of the video, which is going to be quite long I assume, will be me explaining the plot of The Whisper in Darkness. If you've already read it and do not require refreshing, or if you desire to read it yourself first, then I invite you to do so. A link to the story will be in the description, and here is a timestamp to skip ahead. Otherwise, I'm going to try my best to go into detail and over the entire story, which I'm going to warn you again is going to take a bit of time, but I guarantee you that the story is really good and definitely worth it. I'm saying this because for the purpose of this video, I read the story myself about 3 times and also listened to an audiobook version of it as I constructed the following synopsis, which is also the reason as to why this video took so long to make. Sure, the story itself isn't particularly long, I'd say an afternoon read at most, but I did have to go through it multiple times, so yeah, I hope you appreciate it, despite my retelling of it being probably not very good, but I'll let you be the judge of that. And now, without further ado, let's begin. The Whisperer in Darkness features 2 main characters that are consistent throughout the story. The first one is Wilmarth. Wilmarth is a professor of literature at the Miskatonic University in Arkham, and his main passion is folklore, more specifically New England folklore. During November the 3rd, 1972, a great flood sweeps over Vermont, which is something that actually happened in real life. Within the story, various newspapers begin reporting what appear to be unnatural creatures floating within the rivers during the flood, but without harboring any actual tangible evidence. More rumors begin surfacing, and while reports come from different sources, all seem to pretty much convey a similar description of the creatures. They were pinkish things about 5 feet long, with crustaceous bodies bearing vast pairs of dorsal fins or membranous wings and several sets of articulated limbs, and with a sort of convoluted ellipsoid, covered with multitudes of very short antennae where a head would ordinarily be. Wilmarth, being the man he is, and known for his interests and studies in New England folklore, is questioned from various friends, students, and co-workers as to what his thoughts are regarding these sightings. While he admits to being surprised as to how close in semblance the various reports are one to another, he dismisses them. He is highly skeptic about the existence of these creatures, to say the least. These speculations regarding the existence of these creatures begin forming an actual debate in the cultural space of Arkham, with 2 sides being formed, the side of the skeptics and the side of the believers. As I already mentioned, Wilmarth is on the side of the skeptics, and his arguments as to why these creatures are nothing more than simple conjecture, which he attributes to all folklore and legends, end up being published in various newspapers, with one newspaper in particular, the Pen Drifter, not only supporting but applauding Wilmarth's skeptical conclusions, with Wilmarth himself eventually becoming a well-known figure within Vermont, at least by name, as he had never personally set foot within that region, his fame coming from the various newspapers publishing his writings and discourses regarding the debate of the existence of the previously mentioned creatures. Eventually, Wilmarth receives a letter from the second character of this story, a man called Henry Wentworth Akeley. It is important to note that for the remainder of the story, excepting towards the very end, Wilmarth and Akeley do not meet each other. all of their exchanges occur over letters. Another important detail to note is that the narrator of the story is Wilmarth himself. Wilmarth does mention multiple times how he is no longer in possession of the various letters he had received from Akeley, and yet within the story we get to read all of these letters and not just a short resume, rather word per word. This is due to Wilmarth rewriting them, as he claims to perfectly remember the contents of each letter. As I quote, "I cannot do better than transcribe in full, so far as is possible, the long letter in which Akeley introduced himself and which formed such an important landmark in my own intellectual history. It is no longer in my possession, but my memory holds almost every word of its portentous message, and again I affirm my confidence in the sanity of the man who wrote it." This is something that can already raise a few doubts as to just how reliable Wilmarth is as a narrator of this story. After all, given that the story is written with him as a narrator, The Whisper in Darkness lacks the theme of an outside narrator, one that is omniscient, and all the information we have available is only the one that Wilmarth directly experiences by himself and is capable of recalling. So it's pretty much up to the reader to decide just how much we can trust Wilmarth's own retelling of the events, how much of what happens within the story, especially towards the end, is in fact real. We don't know for sure. So as I was saying, Wilmarth begins receiving various letters from a man called Akeley, which he describes in the following way. "Most of what I know of Henry Wentworth Akeley was gathered by correspondence with his neighbors and with his only son in California, after my experience in his lonely farmhouse. He was, I discovered, the last representative on his home soil of a long locally distinguished line of jurists, administrators, and gentlemen agriculturists. In him, however, the family mentally had veered away from practical affairs to pure scholarship, so that he had been a notable student of mathematics, astronomy, biology, anthropology, and folklore at the University of Vermont. I had never previously heard of him, and he did not give many autobiographical details in his communications, but from the first I saw he was a man of character, education, and intelligence, albeit a recluse with very little worldly sophistication." Akeley's letters arrive with the purpose of challenging Wilmarth's skepticism. Within his first letter, Akeley claims that he, unlike the other believers, has actual tangible evidence of the existence of monsters living in the woods on the high hills in Vermont. He claims that while he has not seen any of the creatures floating in the rivers during the flood, he has seen similar creatures under different circumstances. He claims to have seen footprints of these monsters, and as of lately the footprints appear to be closer and closer to his own farmhouse, accompanied by voices within the woods, voices which he dares not even attempt to describe on paper, but which he has managed to record through the use of a phonograph and a dictaphone, and that he will arrange for the recording to eventually reach Wilmarth, so that he may listen to it himself, along with a black stone he has recovered in the woods, a stone covered in alien hieroglyphs. Before proceeding with his findings, Akeley includes, halfway through the letter, a disclaimer. While the letter and the contents within are indeed meant to challenge Wilmarth's claims, it is for it to do so only in private, as publicly Akeley is on Wilmarth's side, a skeptic. Akeley claims to have indeed proof of the existence of the monsters, but he also considers that their existence must be kept a secret from the general public, as he fears that if their existence was indeed revealed, people will flock to the area in order to see the creatures by themselves and endanger their own lives. Akeley begins explaining in his letter that the monsters in question are things from another planet being able to live in interstellar space and fly through on it on clumsy, powerful wings, which have a way of resisting the ether, but which are too poor at steering to be of much use in helping them about on Earth. Something I would like to point out about this part here is the mentioning of the word ether. It's important to note that when The Whisper in Darkness was written in the 1930s, humanity had a limited knowledge in regards to the concept of the outer space, and the popular scientific theory back at the time claimed that the ether was this sort of transparent material or substance that pretty much filled the entirety of space, and that the space between each planet was not just simply a void of nothingness, something that was obviously disproven later on. It's not particularly relevant to the story, but I thought it was a little bit of a fun trivia to just point out. Anyway, Akeley continues explaining that these creatures that have apparently arrived from outer space live within the mountains because it is not their goals to establish themselves on Earth, rather they use it as a sort of an outpost for their mining colonies, which they use to extract a type of metal that is not present on their native planet, which he suspects the name and location of. He claims that, as they currently are, the monsters do not present too much of a threat to the general public if left undisturbed, and if required, a group of armed soldiers could easily dispatch of the entire mining colony. But by doing so, he fears that they will return in greater numbers to simply conquer the entirety of Earth, and that they haven't done so yet despite being fully capable, simply because they couldn't be bothered. Another reason as to why Wilmarth and Akeley should keep their existence a secret, as maintaining the status quo appears to be the most favorable outcome for all parties involved. Afterwards, Akeley further expresses one of his main concerns in the letter, revealing that he suspects the alien to be aware of him and what he has discovered, and now wanting to get rid of him either by killing him or taking him away on their planet, something that they've apparently done before, according to Akeley, with other humans, particularly men of learning, to keep themselves informed on the state of things in the human world. In order to avoid such a fate, Akeley is considering moving out of the farmhouse to live with his son, who is currently located in California, but he is reticent to do so, as he believes that it will be wrong to simply sell the house to someone else, now that the aliens have drawn their attention to it. That, and the fact that the house has been in his family's possession for 6 generations now. Akeley requests of Wilmarth to take this knowledge and any future knowledge he is willing to share, and in exchange to put an end to the current debate of the aliens' existence and attempt to move the public to other matters, in order to avoid raising more attention towards what appears to be an already precarious situation, given that more and more tourists appear to be visiting Vermont during the summer, especially around the areas that he deems to be dangerous. Akeley concludes the letter by stating that with Wilmarth's help and his knowledge of old legends and folklore, he might be capable of deciphering the black stone he has found in the woods, as it may be linked to old myths of Yog-Sothoth and Cthulhu, further hinted at in the Necronomicon, which he had access to a copy of it once, and believes that Wilmarth does so too in his college's library under lock and key. Akeley claims that he is now currently living alone in his farmhouse, as any hired help simply refuses to stay due to the farmhouse guard dog's incessant and constant barking at night, barking at the things that are attempting to approach his house in the dark. As the letter concludes, Wilmarth is left dumbfounded and confused. He claims that normally he would have simply laughed it off, discarding it as the ramblings of a madman, or of a bored one with too much imagination and free time, but the tone of the letter made him approach it with what he described as paradoxical seriousness. He believes that despite it all, there was a certain logic in Akeley's statements, and that they even matched with some old Indian myths, which only served to drive his curiosity forward. And to respond to Akeley's letter, requesting more details on the matter, receiving in return photographs backing Akeley's claims, photographs of large claw prints in the mud, of the entrance of a cave bearing more unnatural tracks and prints on the ground, and lastly a photograph of the black stone which Akeley mentioned in his letter. Eventually Wilmarth will receive through postage the phonograph record, which would ultimately serve to further strengthen Akeley's claims. Upon playing the record, Wilmarth will hear 2 distinct voices, one of a human appearing to be chanting a praise to Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods, and a secondary voice, buzzing like an insect, but attempting to imitate human speech, also seemingly chanting the following words: "Go out among men, and find the ways thereof, that he in the gulf may know. To Nyarlathotep, mighty messenger, must all things be told, and he shall put on the semblance of man, the waxen mask and the robe that hides, and come down from the world of 7 suns to mock." The presence of a human voice alongside the alien one was not surprising at this point, as Akeley in his letters had informed Wilmarth that the aliens had human allies on Earth, collaborators, spies, agents working to maintain the secrecy of their presence, which he believed were fully aware of his findings and were planning to silence him. After this point, communication between Wilmarth and Akeley will begin to complicate. Akeley would inform Wilmarth that more than once letters started going missing while en route, suspecting someone might be intercepting them, and so he would offer Wilmarth an alternative address to send his letters to. Alongside that, Akeley will reveal that when shipping the phonograph record, he had noticed a man at the train station being highly inquisitive with various clerks in regard to the destination of the train which will transfer the record, even boarding the train itself afterwards, something that made Akeley feel uneasy, as he suspected that man to be an agent. Wilmarth and Akeley would continue exchanging letters for a while, and with every new revelation that will come from their joint investigation into the horrors plaguing Vermont, the situation will also increase in its severity. Eventually, Akeley would reveal in his letters that his farmhouse was being attacked at night by agents of the aliens, leading to gunfire being exchanged by both Akeley and the agents, from which Akeley would emerge victorious, although at the cost of many of his guard dogs, forcing Akeley to purchase more guard dogs at the kennels in town, along with enough ammunition to defend his home. From this point onward, the nightly attacks will become almost a regular occurrence. Gunfire will be exchanged, his dogs will get killed, forcing Akeley to become a regular customer of the kennels. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that by this point, Akeley was essentially supporting the entire guard dogs business all by himself. And to no one's surprise, the owner of the kennels was also growing increasingly suspicious as to Akeley's own mental stability. But that wouldn't stop this nightmarish scenario to become a routine that Akeley was unwillingly forced to partake in, with Akeley eventually managing to kill some of the aliens. All of this information was of course told to Wilmarth through Akeley's letters, along with the fact that Akeley was now completely sure that the aliens were no longer content with the idea of Akeley simply dropping his investigation and moving away to California. Their goal was now to dispose of him no matter what, and possibly Wilmarth as well, given that by intercepting their letters, they had become fully aware of his involvement and knowledge in the matter too, and that very reason did cause Akeley to warn Wilmarth that under no condition he should attempt to visit or meet him. Days and nights will pass under this routine, until eventually Wilmarth will receive one final letter from Akeley, the strangest of them all. This one written through a typewriter rather than by hand, which I'm going to quote the beginning of. Open quote, "My dear Wilmarth, it gives me great pleasure to be able to set you at rest regarding all the silly things I've been writing you. I say silly, although by that I mean my frightened attitude rather than my descriptions of certain phenomena. Those phenomena are real and important enough. My mistake had been in establishing an anomalous attitude towards them. I think I mentioned that my strange visitors were beginning to communicate with me, and to attempt such communication. Last night, this exchange of speech became actual. In response to certain signals, I admitted to the house a messenger from those outside, a fellow human, let me hasten to say. He told me much that neither you nor I had even begun to guess, and showed clearly how totally we had misjudged and misinterpreted the purpose of the Outer Ones in maintaining their secrecy colony on this planet." End quote. Akeley's letter will continue, detailing further how he has managed to enter into peaceful contact with the aliens, which he refers to as the Outer Ones now. He explains how the Outer Ones find the notion of enslaving or conquering mankind is ridiculous, and that they wish for nothing more than an increasingly cooperative intellectual rapport. Throughout this letter, Akeley continues explaining what he has learned about the aliens, and more interestingly, about their biology. He explains that the Outer Ones are, in roughly human terms, more plant than animal, and their structure is more biologically similar to that of mushrooms or fungi, but not quite like any type of fungi in the traditional sense, as their bodies are composed of a type of matter so distinct than anything found on Earth that their very electrons vibrate in a way to make them impossible to be even photographed with traditional film imagery. They communicate through telepathy, although through surgery they are capable of altering themselves in order to acquire rudimentary vocal cords and communicate in a more traditional sense. Akeley also refers to their home planet as Yugoth, a yet undiscovered and almost lightless planet located at the edge of our solar system, beyond Neptune, ninth in distance from the Sun, a planet that later on will be known as Pluto, which was as of yet undiscovered during the time this story took place. Ending his letter, Akeley informs Wilmarth that he would like to share all of the information he has learned, but doing so on paper will be unwise, and to that end he invites Wilmarth to visit him and bring along all of the letters he had received from him up until that point, the photographs and the phonograph record as consultative data, in order to piece together the whole story, while also remaining discreet about it. Wilmarth will be surprised and confused to say the least after reading Akeley's letter. Now we as the readers can already tell pretty much that something is definitely wrong. But Wilmarth is also suspicious as to what he refers to as Akeley's sudden mutation. He is shocked by how Akeley's whole personality seems to have undergone such a drastic change, and as to how his words of choice and spelling in the letter were subtly different from what he had received so far. For a moment, Wilmarth suspected that the letter was not sent by Akeley himself, rather by someone pretending to be Akeley, a doubt that was further fueled by the fact that the letter had been written on a typewriter, and thus he was not able to compare the handwriting with previous letters. But a part of him found it odd that, if that were to be the case, he wouldn't have been invited to meet Akeley himself, something that could have proven whether the letter was indeed sent by Akeley or not upon meeting him. At this point, I think Wilmarth himself was perhaps fully aware that accepting the invitation would have been akin to walking into what seemed like an obvious trap, and yet he decides to do exactly that. He readies himself, takes the letters, the phonograph record and the photographs and boards a train, or rather multiple, in order to finally meet Akeley. As to why would Wilmarth even decide to walk into this highly suspicious situation, I think it can be attributed to multiple reasons. Perhaps he was worried about Akeley, someone that he had grown to view as a friend throughout their period of exchanging letters, or perhaps it was nothing but academic or personal curiosity that ushered him to get to the bottom of this whole story. As Wilmarth eventually arrives to the train station of Brattleboro, where he was supposed to meet with Akeley, he is instead approached by someone who was seemingly expecting him, someone who very obviously couldn't be Akeley himself. The man was far too young and fashionably dressed, wearing only a small dark mustache. The person in question referred to himself as Mr. Noise, someone who claimed to be a friend of Akeley, and he explained that he was sent in order to receive and pick up Wilmarth and drive him to Akeley's farmhouse, as Akeley himself was apparently feeling unwell and was currently unable to leave his home. After driving for a while, the two will finally reach Akeley's farmhouse. It was a lonely place, seemingly isolated from the rest of the world, finding itself in what could be defined as a wild area. Mr. Noise will proceed to announce Akeley of Wilmarth's arrival, before claiming that he had important business to attend to elsewhere, and couldn't attend the meeting himself. In the meantime, Wilmarth will notice something slightly odd. Akeley's dogs, or rather a lack of them, for there was not a singular one to be seen or heard around the farmhouse, which he found a bit odd, given how many Akeley had claimed to have in his numerous letters. Wilmarth assumed that Akeley must have sold the dogs after coming into peaceful contact with the other ones, believing that they were no longer of use, and yet he couldn't shake off the feeling that something more sinister was perhaps taking place. Looking around the farmhouse in Mr. Noise's absence, he will notice something even more shocking: footprints of the other ones. While he had seen them before in the photographs sent to him by Akeley, that will be the first time for him to observe them himself. Shortly after, Mr. Noise would appear and announce Wilmarth that Akeley was ready to receive him, and with that he would bid his farewells and leave the farmhouse, leaving Wilmarth by himself. Stepping inside, Wilmarth is immediately disturbed, or rather a bit confused by the general state of the house. While there wasn't anything out of place or unexpected per se, the interior of the house was unnaturally quiet and dark. Wilmarth begins to navigate the house as instructed by Mr. Noise, and eventually reaches the door, which he pushes open, revealing another room, Akeley's study. The room was dark and filled with a mysterious smell, and a hacking noise immediately draws Wilmarth's attention to the corner of the room, where he will finally come face to face with Akeley. Wilmarth's first reaction is one of shock. The man sitting in the corner, presumably Akeley, looked far worse than expected. He looked sicklish, feeble, pallid. Akeley proceeded to greet Wilmarth with a sicklish, coarse whisper, as his current condition prevented him from speaking louder, but it didn't prevent him from speaking out on everything he had learned. It was at this point that Wilmarth will be revealed, mostly everything, by Akeley. The fungoid aliens, the Outer Ones, as they were being called now, had arrived from Yugoth, which back when the events of this story took place was the by then undiscovered Pluto, as I said earlier, and that their technological advancements were so great that for them, practically nothing was off the table, including things such as time travel by achieving faster than light speed. Among other details, the greatest reveal from Akeley was perhaps the fact that the Outer Ones were not against the idea of allowing humans to accompany them on their journeys through the stars. It was in fact something that they encouraged, and Akeley, along with Wilmarth, potentially, could be their next guests. Akeley explained that while humans lacked the biological capability of surviving a journey through space, the Outer Ones had devised a technology capable of surmounting this human quote-unquote weakness through the use of a device which would allow them to extract a human brain, place it securely within a jar, and then once properly connected, allow the brain inside of it to perceive the outside world and even communicate, something that Akeley will provide proof for by showing Wilmarth one of such devices left at its farmhouse by the aliens. The device in question, resembling a cylinder made of a material that Wilmarth could not recognize, had a human brain inside, which was fully capable of communicating once properly connected to a series of other devices which Wilmarth will turn on under Akeley's instructions. The strange apparatus began to communicate, and while its voice was an electronic one of sorts, the way and the clarity through which it spoke, while also appearing to be completely aware of its surroundings, left Wilmarth convinced that it couldn't have been a trick as simple as a recording or radio. The brain will present itself as a fellow human, just like Akeley and Wilmarth. It will proceed to recount to Wilmarth its numerous journeys through the stars and galaxies, adding that he will be immensely pleased if Wilmarth himself will decide to join him, referring to the Outer Ones, the aliens, as visitors, a term used to refer to the aliens, previously only by Akeley, allegedly, during his final letter. Eventually, the conversation between Akeley, Wilmarth, and the brain would end. It was time for the three to bid goodnight to each other, and to resume everything in the morning. Wilmarth will proceed to retreat to the guest room, pondering upon what he had just witnessed, his emotions still a mix of disbelief and horror. After falling asleep, Wilmarth will wake up in the middle of the night and witness something so horrifying that will cause him to simply grab his belongings and flee from the farmhouse. It is important to note that in the story as written, we the readers don't get to find out yet what made Wilmarth flee in terror, we just know that something did, and that something is revealed at the very end, where we find out that while investigating the farmhouse at night, along other disturbing things, Wilmarth will find himself once again in Akeley's study, but this time Akeley was missing, and in his place, on the chair he was seen sitting on previously by Wilmarth, he would only see the gown that Akeley was wearing, and hiding underneath it, a set of metallic clamps, and more horrifyingly, and to quote the very last sentence of the story, "For the things in the chair, perfect to the last subtle detail of microscopic resemblance or identity, were the face and hands of Henry Wentworth Akeley." So before we continue this video, I want to say a couple of things. First of all, thanks for seeing through this. Making a book or story synopsises is definitely not my specialty. I might have dragged a few plot points too much or explained certain points too little. For that I apologize. But I did want to go kind of in detail in regard to the Whisper in Darkness, because as I said earlier in the video, this video was not just about No I'm Not Human, it was also about this story in particular. The main reason being the fact that I always wanted to talk about the Lovecraft story, but never thought that dedicating its own video to one would have really worked, and this felt like the perfect occasion, so thank you again for seeing through that. Next, I want to talk about the story itself. So what is it about The Whisper in Darkness that makes it a good story, at least in my opinion? I think it's pretty fascinating how almost 2/3 of the story, if not more, take place over postage, letters. It's sort of the ancient equivalent of modern stories that we'd read nowadays that will take place mainly over text messages or computer logs as their main form of exposition. Of course, not the entire story takes place over letters. In fact, if we want to be really precise about it, nothing does. It's just Wilmart's retelling and rewriting of said letters from memory. Still, I think it was a pretty fascinating thing. It's also interesting to see how the story contains elements that nowadays we would consider to be a cliché, like the idea of aliens coming from outer space to harvest materials from Earth, the idea of human brains placed in jars and being still fully conscious. These are all elements that in modern media you can find plenty of examples of. But back then, it really wasn't the case. Lovecraft was, in a certain sense, at least in this story in particular, sort of a sci-fi horror writer, combining cosmic horror elements within it as well. And this is interesting because at the time this was something relatively new. Most horror focused on old elements of folklore, so basically ghosts, werewolves, vampires, and so forth. Surely he wasn't the very first to write about aliens from outer space, but he was definitely exploring a still largely untapped territory in writing. So it is kind of interesting to see how many of these ideas were so good to end up persisting to the point of becoming a cliché in modern media. And I feel that this story, and many of his stories actually, did manage to stand the test of time. Now, for the analysis of the story itself, I think it's pretty obvious to say that the title is referencing the final part of the story, the Whisperer in Darkness being Akeley sitting in his chair, or at least the alien, the outer one, pretending to be Akeley after taking his place. Of course, as good as this story was, it also had a few negative things about it. My gripe with it is that a couple of plot points didn't make much sense, or rather they did, but they felt kind of forced. For example, Wilmart deciding to willingly visit Akeley and bringing along all of the papers, the research, and the phonograph record, despite himself realizing that the entire situation felt like a trap, and even suspecting or believing for a brief moment that Akeley had been replaced. I know it was a necessary thing for him to visit Akeley, otherwise we wouldn't have had much of an ending to the story. It was necessary for that to happen, but it still felt somewhat forced, because Wilmart did know something was wrong, and that is clearly shown by the fact that at some point during the story, he does mention bringing a firearm along. Another gripe I had with it is the fact that after all of the effort the other ones put into luring Wilmart to the farmhouse, is the fact that they will just let him simply get away. For those who read the entire story and didn't just listen to my synopsis, yes, it is mentioned at some point that Wilmart was served a coffee which he didn't drink as its taste and smell were foul, and it was suspected for the coffee to have been drugged, so there was at least an attempt to subdue him. But this is all there was, an attempt but no real effort, which doesn't make much sense as the Outer Ones obviously wanted to dispose of Akeley because he already knew too much, but at that point in the story Wilmart knew just as much, so it's kind of weird that they will just let him escape the way he did. Although it is worth mentioning that they managed to get rid of the evidence by collecting the phonograph record and the letters, so who knows, maybe they didn't want to draw even further suspicions by having another person disappear? It's a bit weird. The final gripe that I have is how many elements of Lovecraft's mythos are so overly mentioned within this story in particular. We get a mention of the Necronomicon, we get a mention of Shub-Niggurath, we get a mention of Cthulhu, of Nyarlathotep, but all of these don't really serve a purpose in the story in itself. They create a connection with his other stories, but those connections don't really go anywhere within this particular story. It feels like they were mentioned just for the sake of being mentioned, just for the sake of reminding the reader that this is a Lovecraft story, and it takes place within that universe, sort of like a trademark thing. But they don't go anywhere really, they're just kinda there. Other than that, the story is fantastic, and I totally recommend you read it on your own. But now the question begs, how does this story connect to the one of No, I'm Not a Human? It should be clear by this point that the story in the game was definitely inspired, if not at the very least somewhat influenced by The Whisper in Darkness, at least some parts of it. In terms of similar elements, we have obviously first and foremost the imposter theme, Akeley being replaced by a non-human creature attempting to pass as one. Another special shock came from my own attitude towards my host whenever I paused to analyze it. For much as I had instinctively liked Akeley as revealed in his correspondence, I now found that he filled me with a distinct repulsion. His illness ought to have excited my pity, but instead it gave me a kind of shudder. He was so rigid and inert and corpse-like, and that incessant whispering was so hateful and unhuman. This specific part of the story does point out Wilmarth's subconscious uncanny valley triggering at the sight of the one pretending to be Akeley, with Wilmarth being aware on a certain degree that something was definitely wrong, and yet being unable to determine what exactly. By the end of the story, we are revealed that an alien was essentially just wearing either a mask resembling Akeley's face, or perhaps Akeley's own face, his own skin, similarly to how the pale man in No I'm Not Human is mentioned as apparently wearing someone else's skin. The outer ones are also referenced to as visitors in the story, once in Akeley's final letter, which we can safely assume to have been written by one of the aliens themselves, and if not by Mr. Noise or one of the other human agents of the aliens, and another time by the brain in a jar which Wilmarth meets in the farmhouse, which most likely could have been the real Akeley himself. In No I'm Not Human, a few characters do refer to the visitors as aliens, or to be exact, descendants of aliens. This is something that the Sun Guy will say during one of his dialogues. He will also mention the visitors themselves being afraid of the sun, something that is also true for the aliens in The Whisperer in Darkness, as they were original inhabitants of Pluto, or Yugot, a place without any light. Another interesting detail that sort of forms a connection to No I'm Not Human is the outer ones being fungal creatures, not quite animal, not quite plant. This is of course sort of relevant to the plot of No I'm Not Human, as one of the theories does place the visitors as victims of a fungal parasite. I don't think this has an inherent connection to the Shroom or Doom ending, the one with the Book of Smiles, but mushrooms definitely seem to be a theme within all this. So is this the solution to the lore of No I'm Not Human? Is The Whisper in Darkness the answer to all the questions that we had so far? Honestly, no, I think not. There are some undeniable similarities between the two, and with Lovecraft's story being referenced in the game, it might be tempting to think that the developer was attempting to send us a message, but ultimately there is no proof that demonstrates anything. Sometimes a reference is just a reference. After all, No I'm Not Human was never meant to confirm much in regard its own plot, story or universe, at least for now. The only real conclusions are the ones that we come to ourselves. If you're inclined to believe that the visitors are the Mi-Go aliens from Lovecraft's stories, then you are within your right to do so. I assure you, you aren't more mistaken or less mistaken than the guy who believes the visitors to be a biological virus, or the one believing the visitors to be demons from hell, as the amount of unclear, unreliable, and approximate and generalistic information in the game allows for most theories to be somewhat viable. And now for another important question: how does this relate to the blinded man and the creature called It? It is, after all, his ultimate fate and the achievement associated with it that led us into this rabbit hole to begin with. Now, what I'm going to say is of course just my own personal theory and my own thoughts. This could be completely wrong, so do take it with a pinch of salt. The Whisper in Darkness is a title for the blinded man. I think this is made pretty obvious by the fact that the achievement under the same name is directly related to him as a character. The blinded man is similar to Akeley. It's a normal human that ends up witnessing something he shouldn't have and becomes haunted by this forbidden knowledge as a result. While he is never directly replaced by anyone, unlike Akeley, he doesn't get his title of Whisperer in Darkness by sitting in the corner of a dark room, rather by the fact that he is quite literally in darkness, as he blinded himself, and is now unable to see anything. He shares as much as he can from personal experience, and he's also the only one who witnessed it, and the little that he knows is still more than the rest, this knowledge and encounter eventually leading to his death, although with the difference that Akeley's final fate was probably not a result caused by his own hand, but still a consequence of the incomprehensible horrors that he shouldn't have witnessed. But wait, I hear you say. If the blinded man is the equivalent of Akeley in this story, does that make our character to be Wilmarth? And to that I say, maybe. It is perhaps a bit of a stretch, but if you compare the two characters, we can see a bit of a Wilmarth in our character. After all, they both began their stories by being told rumors of the supposed existence of unnatural creatures, and both appear to be rather skeptic at first, having to put their trust on limited proof and words of others. Perhaps it would be more correct to say that in a sense they are both Akeley, with our character representing Akeley in his lonely farmhouse, armed with a gun and surrounded by dogs, attempting to make sense and gather clues about the absurd situation he finds himself into, and the blinded man representing Akeley at the very end, after having witnessed the full cosmic horrors laid before him. How all of this relates to it, the body-eating creature, is still a bit of a mystery, but I think it will be safest to say that by comparison of the two stories, for it to be the counterpart of the outer ones, the aliens that Akeley meets in the story and that leave him permanently altered. Although there isn't a lot to go on about that. The game does love to keep things unclear, and that's fine. It allows for us to come up with our own conclusions, which at times I believe can be far more satisfying than having the answers spelled out directly. But enough about my rambling. I feel like I already rambled far more than I should have, but I had a lot of fun doing so, and I hope you enjoyed listening to me. I think it's time for me to listen to you. What did you think of The Whisper in Darkness? How do you think it relates to the story of No, I'm Not Human? Is there a deeper meaning to it? Or do you think it's nothing but a quick reference that leads nowhere, a red herring of sorts perhaps? Let me know down in the comments below. I'm curious as to what you all think about it. With this being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to my channel. As always, I would like to thank this channel's members for their continued support. You guys are amazing, and if any of you would like to join them, you can do so through the join button down below. I hope you'll have a good night, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.